The woman in seat 19C looked ordinary, faded jeans, paperback novel, completely invisible. Then the pilot's voice cracked with terror, both engines failed, and she walked to the cockpit with movements that made flight attendants step aside. When F-22 pilots heard her name over the radio, they saluted from 30,000 feet. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The woman in seat 19C was nobody. She had been nobody during the entire boarding process at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport on that gray November morning. Nobody to the gate agent who scanned her ticket without looking up. Nobody to the businessman in 19B who claimed both armrests before she even sat down. Nobody to the teenager in 19D who blasted music through headphones, completely oblivious to her presence. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Kim wore faded blue jeans, a simple black hoodie, and white Converse sneakers that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun. She carried a beat-up backpack and a dog-eared paperback thriller with a cracked spine. Everything about her screamed ordinary millennial traveler, on an ordinary Thursday morning. She settled into her window seat without ceremony, tucked her backpack under the seat in front, and opened her book. When the flight attendant came by with her professional smile and cheerful, "Welcome aboard," Rachel nodded politely and returned to reading. The flight attendant moved on, already forgetting another unremarkable face in coach. Delta Flight 2156 pushed back from gate N7 at 6:18 a.m., 12 minutes ahead of schedule. The Airbus A321neo was bound for Boston Logan on what should have been a routine 5-hour flight. Captain James Morrison, a 30-year veteran with 22,000 flight hours, and First Officer Kevin Park with 7,500 hours had reviewed their flight plan and found nothing concerning. Light morning traffic, favorable winds, perfect conditions. Rachel glanced at her phone as the big Airbus accelerated down runway 16L and lifted smoothly into the Washington sky. 6:32 a.m. She silenced her phone, slipped it into airplane mode, and returned to her book as Seattle disappeared beneath a thick blanket of clouds. For the first 90 minutes, everything proceeded exactly as expected. The beverage service came through. Rachel ordered black coffee and thanked the flight attendant quietly. Passengers around her scrolled through tablets, dozed, or worked on laptops. The businessman beside her never acknowledged her existence. The teenager never stopped watching TikTok videos. Rachel Kim remained invisible, unremarkable, forgotten. At 8:03 a.m., over Montana at 37,000 feet, everything changed. Rachel was 3 chapters into her book when she felt it, a subtle vibration that didn't belong. Her hand stilled on the page. The vibration came again, accompanied by a barely perceptible shudder through the airframe. She looked up, listening intently. Most passengers noticed nothing. But Rachel's trained ears caught the frequency shift in the engine noise. Something was wrong. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison frowned at his engine instruments. "Kevin, I'm seeing some unusual readings on number 1. First Officer Park leaned forward. "EGT is climbing. Oil pressure fluctuating." Before Morrison could respond, a loud bang shook the entire aircraft. Passengers gasped. A woman screamed. Overhead bins rattled violently. Rachel's book tumbled to the floor as the Airbus lurched hard to the left. She immediately looked out her window. What she saw made her blood run cold. The number 1 engine, the left engine, was disintegrating. The cowling had separated, trailing debris and smoke into the slipstream. But worse, much worse, she could see flames. Not smoke. Actual fire, bright orange against the gray Montana sky, and it was spreading toward the wing fuel tanks. In the cockpit, every alarm was screaming. "Engine fire, engine 1. Park shouted, reaching for the fire suppression handle. Morrison fought the controls as the aircraft rolled violently. "I've got it. Engine fire checklist now." Park pulled the fire handle, shutting down fuel and hydraulics to the burning engine. He pressed the fire extinguisher button. Fire bottle 1 discharged. The fire didn't go out. "Fire bottle 2. Morrison ordered. Park pressed the second button. For a terrible moment, they watched the engine fire light remain illuminated. Then it finally went out. "Fire extinguished," Park confirmed, his voice shaking with relief. But Morrison's hands were white-knuckled on the yoke. "Kevin, I've got major control problems. Hydraulic pressure dropping on multiple systems. This isn't just engine failure, we've got shrapnel damage." In the cabin, oxygen masks had dropped with a loud whoosh, yellow cups swinging wildly. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, trying to help panicked passengers while the aircraft pitched and rolled unpredictably. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison," His voice was tight, controlled, but Rachel could hear the underlying tension. "We have experienced an engine emergency and have shut down the affected engine. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, secure the cabin immediately." Rachel had already secured her oxygen mask with quick, practiced movements. Her eyes never left the damaged engine. The fire was out, but she could see the extent of the destruction. Half the cowling was gone. The turbine blades were visible, several of them missing. And most concerning, the wing structure near the engine pylon showed visible damage. She did rapid mental calculations. Single engine failure on an A321, survivable and trained for regularly. But combined with apparent hydraulic damage and possible wing structural compromise over mountainous terrain? That changed everything. The businessman beside her was hyperventilating into his oxygen mask, eyes squeezed shut, hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles were white. The teenager was sobbing quietly, phone clutched to her chest, trying to text her parents. But Rachel Kim remained absolutely calm. Her breathing was steady and controlled. Her eyes constantly moved, window to wing, wing to cabin, cabin to flight attendants, processing every detail with analytical precision. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Ma'am, you need to remain seated." A flight attendant called out immediately, rushing toward her. Rachel ignored her and pressed the call button 3 times rapidly, military emergency signal. She moved forward through the cabin with the balanced, practiced stability of someone who'd walked through countless aircraft in turbulent conditions, automatically adjusting her balance like a sailor on a ship. Jennifer Walsh, the lead flight attendant, intercepted her near row 12. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat immediately. We have an emergency." Rachel looked at her with eyes that made Jennifer's words die mid-sentence. Calm, intense, utterly focused eyes that belonged to someone who'd seen far worse than this. "I know you have an emergency," Rachel said quietly but with absolute authority. "I need to speak with your flight deck crew immediately. I'm a pilot and I have information that can help them." Jennifer hesitated. Protocol said no passengers in the cockpit during emergencies. But something about this woman, the way she stood despite the aircraft's wild movements, the complete absence of fear in her eyes, the practiced way she'd moved through the cabin, made Jennifer make a split-second decision. "Follow me." Jennifer picked up the cockpit interphone. "Flight deck, I have a passenger who says she's a pilot and needs to speak with you urgently." Morrison's frustrated voice came back immediately. "Jennifer, we're a little busy up here dealing with catastrophic engine failure and hydraulic problems." Rachel reached for the phone. Jennifer handed it to her. "Captain, this is Lieutenant Commander Rachel Kim, United States Navy. I need you to listen very carefully because I'm looking at your damage from the cabin, and you have bigger problems than you think. Your engine didn't just fail, you have wing structural damage and your fire may have compromised fuel system integrity. I've seen this before and I know how to get you on the ground." Dead silence. Then Morrison's voice, sharp with surprise and desperation, "Who did you say you are?" Rachel spoke clearly and precisely. "Lieutenant Commander Rachel Kim, United States Navy, carrier aviator with 3,200 flight hours in tactical aircraft including F/A-18 Super Hornets. Call sign Viper. I was heading to Boston for Navy training exercises. From my window seat I can see your engine damage and I can hear what your aircraft is doing. You're dealing with asymmetric thrust, degraded hydraulics, possible wing structural damage, and you're over mountainous terrain with limited divert options." Park's voice came on, urgent and skeptical. "Commander Kim, can you verify that information?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "Your captain is James Morrison. You're flying an Airbus A321neo at approximately 37,000 feet over Montana. You've lost your number 1 engine with what sounded like an uncontained failure, you've shut it down and discharged both fire bottles, but you're experiencing flight control problems suggesting hydraulic damage from engine debris. You're trying to figure out where you can land, but you're not sure you can maintain control long enough to reach a suitable airport. How am I doing?" Silence. Then Morrison's voice, deadly serious, "That's accurate, Commander. Send her up." The cockpit door unlocked. Rachel moved through quickly. Her eyes immediately scanned the instrument panels, taking in the cascade of warning lights, the artificial horizon showing their unstable attitude, Morrison's physical strain as he fought the controls. She positioned herself between the pilot's seats, one hand bracing against the overhead panel. "Captain, First Officer, I need you to trust me for the next several minutes. What's your hydraulic status?" Park pointed to his display. "System green is gone completely. Blue is degraded to 60%. Yellow is holding at 80% but fluctuating. Rachel processed this instantly. You're flying an Airbus with fly-by-wire controls. Unlike Boeing, you don't have direct mechanical backup. You're entirely dependent on hydraulic systems to move flight control surfaces. Losing green and degrading blue means you're operating on marginal control authority. Morrison nodded grimly. We're experiencing that. Aircraft is extremely difficult to control. Every input is sluggish, imprecise. Because your flight control computers are trying to compensate for lost hydraulic pressure, Rachel explained quickly. They're reducing your control inputs to prevent overstressing the remaining systems. That's by design, but it makes the aircraft feel unresponsive. She leaned forward, studying the navigation display. Where are you planning to land? Billings, Montana is closest, 70 miles northeast. We've already declared emergency and requested vectors. Rachel shook her head immediately. Billings requires a turn and descent through mountainous terrain with degraded controls. That's high risk. What else? Park consulted the flight management computer. Great Falls is 90 miles north, but that requires even more maneuvering. Next option is Spokane at 180 miles west, but too far. Rachel cut him off. She studied the moving map display, her mind calculating distance, altitude, terrain, control limitations. What about Malmstrom Air Force Base near Great Falls? It's a strategic air command base with long runways designed for heavy bombers and full emergency response capabilities. Morrison looked surprised. I didn't think of military bases. Call them now, Rachel said firmly. Military bases are trained for catastrophic emergencies. They have equipment and personnel who deal with damaged aircraft regularly. And more importantly, Malmstrom has a nearly straight-in approach from your current position with minimal terrain complications. Morrison keyed his radio. Denver Center, Delta 2156 Heavy requesting immediate vectors to Malmstrom Air Force Base, Great Falls, Montana. We need to speak with Malmstrom Tower immediately. The controller responded instantly. Delta 2156 Heavy, say again your requested destination? Malmstrom Air Force Base. We have catastrophic engine failure, severe hydraulic degradation, and a military pilot on board assisting who recommends Malmstrom as best option for our situation. Brief pause. Delta 2156 Heavy, roger. Stand by for Malmstrom coordination. What is the name of the military pilot assisting? Rachel reached for the radio. Morrison gestured permission. Denver Center, this is Delta 2156 Heavy. Assisting pilot is Lieutenant Commander Rachel Kim, United States Navy, call sign Viper. Longer pause this time. Then the controller's voice returned, noticeably different, respectful, almost reverent. Delta 2156 Heavy, understand Commander Rachel Kim, call sign Viper is on board assisting. We are coordinating immediately with Malmstrom. Stand by. At Malmstrom Air Force Base Operations Center, Senior Airman Marcus Johnson was monitoring routine traffic when the call came through. He listened, then his eyes went wide. Sir. He called to his supervisor, Master Sergeant David Price. Civilian airliner declaring emergency, requesting emergency landing. They have a Navy pilot on board assisting, Commander Rachel Kim, call sign Viper. Price dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, but he didn't notice. Did you say Viper? Commander Rachel Kim? Yes, Sergeant. Price grabbed the phone to base command. This is operations. We have an emergency inbound civilian aircraft, and Commander Rachel Kim, Viper, is on board. Yes sir, that Viper. We need to roll everything. Now. Within 2 minutes, alerts went out to Air Combat Command, Naval Air Forces, and the Pentagon. The name Rachel Kim, call sign Viper, was legendary throughout military aviation. The pilot who'd landed a burning F-18 on a carrier deck at night in rough seas with one engine and damaged landing gear, saving herself and a $70 million aircraft. The tactical instructor who'd revolutionized carrier aviation training, reducing training accidents by 40%. The combat veteran who'd flown strike missions in 3 conflict zones with a record of 0 friendly fire incidents and perfect target acquisition. The aviator who'd been recommended for the Medal of Honor after rescuing a downed pilot under heavy enemy fire, flying a damaged aircraft that every other pilot said was unflyable. Aboard Delta Flight 2156, Rachel was coaching Morrison and Park through techniques never taught in civilian aviation. Captain, your instinct is to fight the aircraft, to make aggressive control inputs to correct deviations. You need to do the opposite. Small, gentle inputs. Let the aircraft stabilize between corrections. Think of it like flying through ice. Finesse, not force. Morrison tried her technique. The aircraft's wild oscillations began to dampen. It's working. Why didn't I learn this in training? Because commercial aviation trains for normal emergencies with working systems, Rachel explained. Military test pilot schools train for emergencies where multiple systems fail simultaneously. We learn to fly aircraft that don't want to be flown. She pointed to the throttle. Your remaining engine is at maximum power to maintain altitude, but that's creating an asymmetric thrust condition that makes directional control harder. Reduce power to 90%. You'll descend, but you'll gain control authority. Park looked alarmed. Commander, we're already struggling to maintain altitude over mountains. Trust me, Rachel said firmly. You're fighting physics. Reduce the asymmetry and you'll fly more efficiently even at lower power. You'll stabilize your descent rate and actually improve your situation. Morrison made the decision. He pulled the right throttle back to 90%. Immediately, the aircraft's tendency to yaw left decreased dramatically. The control inputs became more effective. They were descending but in a controlled, stable manner. My God, Morrison breathed. That actually works. Rachel nodded. Now let's talk about your approach and landing. Malmstrom will give you runway 02, which aligns almost perfectly with your current track. But landing with degraded hydraulics requires a different technique than you've ever trained for. Over the next 15 minutes, Rachel walked them through unconventional approaches to damaged aircraft control. She explained energy management when you can't rely on normal flight control response. She described how to use configuration changes, flaps, gear, spoilers, as control tools rather than just performance tools. She taught them to think like test pilots, constantly analyzing cause and effect, predicting aircraft response before making inputs. The radio crackled. Delta 2156 Heavy, Malmstrom Tower. You are cleared for straight-in approach runway 02. All traffic has been cleared. Emergency equipment is positioned. Winds are 030 at 12 knots. Runway is 12,900 feet long. You are cleared to land. Rachel studied the approach profile. Captain, I want you configured for landing much earlier than normal. Every configuration change will produce control challenges, and you need altitude and time to manage each one. Extend flaps to position 1 right now. Morrison complied. As the flaps extended, the aircraft pitched up slightly. With Rachel's coaching, he compensated smoothly using power adjustments rather than aggressive yoke inputs. Perfect. You're learning. Now maintain this configuration until you're established on final approach. Don't rush anything. At 10 miles out and 5,000 feet, Malmstrom Air Force Base came into view. Emergency vehicles lined both sides of the runway, lights flashing. Fire trucks, ambulances, rescue equipment, everything the base had rolled out. In the base tower, Colonel Sarah Henderson, Malmstrom's commanding officer, stood watching through binoculars. Beside her, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Torres, Operations Group Commander and former F-16 pilot, monitored the radio. That's Viper talking them through the approach, Torres said with awe in his voice. I flew with her at Miramar 8 years ago. She's the best stick-and-rudder pilot I've ever seen. If anyone can bring that airliner down safely, it's her. Henderson nodded, never lowering her binoculars. Let's make sure we're ready for whatever condition that aircraft arrives in. Aboard the flight, Rachel called out instructions in calm, measured cadence as they descended through 3,000 feet. 5 miles out, airspeed 180 knots, descent rate 700 feet per minute. Looking good, Captain. Extend flaps to position 2 and lower landing gear. Morrison followed her instructions precisely. The gear came down with reassuring thumps. The aircraft's descent rate increased slightly. Counter that with 5% more power. Don't chase the airspeed, let it stabilize naturally. At 3 miles and 2,000 feet, Rachel gave final configuration instructions. Flaps to landing position full. This will create significant pitch change and increased drag. Anticipate it and add power smoothly. The flaps extended to maximum. The aircraft pitched up aggressively. Morrison added power as Rachel coached, managing the configuration change more smoothly than he would have thought possible an hour ago. Outstanding, Captain. You're doing exceptional work. First Officer Park, you're going to call out altitudes and airspeeds through the flare. Captain Morrison, remember, this landing will not be pretty. You don't have the control authority for a normal flare. You're going to fly this aircraft onto the runway at approximately 400 feet per minute descent rate. Don't try to arrest the descent completely. Accept a firm landing and focus on keeping the wings level and nose straight. Morrison's hands were steady on the controls, but his voice shook slightly. Understood. Firm landing, maintain alignment. Exactly. As soon as you touch down, idle power, deploy spoilers, maximum reverse thrust on your remaining engine and maximum braking. You'll need every foot of that runway. They crossed the runway threshold at 150 feet. At 100 feet, Morrison could see individual runway markings. Emergency vehicles tracked alongside them on parallel taxiways. 50 feet, Park called. Airspeed 145, descent rate 450. 40 feet. Looking stable. 30 feet. 20. 10. Rachel added her voice. Steady, Captain. You've got this. The main landing gear struck the runway with a tremendous thump, bouncing once before settling firmly. Spoilers deployed automatically. Morrison pushed the reverse thrust lever fully forward and stood on the brakes. Maximum reverse, maximum braking, he called out. The aircraft decelerated hard, but it was still carrying tremendous energy. They passed the 4,000-foot marker, still traveling over 100 knots. At 6,000 feet, 80 knots. At 8,000 feet, 60 knots. At 10,000 feet, the aircraft finally rolled to a complete stop with 2,900 feet of runway remaining. Emergency vehicles surrounded them within seconds. Morrison sat back in his seat, hands shaking, sweat soaking his shirt. "We're down," he whispered. "We're actually down." Park was crying quietly, her hands still on the throttles. Rachel placed a hand on Morrison's shoulder. "Outstanding flying, Captain. You just accomplished something most commercial pilots never train for. You adapted, you learned, and you saved everyone on this aircraft." Morrison turned to look at her, tears streaming down his face. "Commander Kim, you saved us. Those techniques, that coaching, I've never seen anything like it. You saved 187 people." Before Rachel could respond, the radio crackled with a new voice. "Delta 2156 Heavy, this is Sword 11, flight of 2 F-22 Raptors overhead your position at Angels 30. We scrambled from Nellis when your emergency was declared. Is it true that Commander Rachel Kim, call sign Viper, is on board your aircraft?" Morrison picked up the microphone, his voice still shaking. "Sword 11, this is Delta 2156. Affirmative, Commander Kim is on board, and she just saved this aircraft and every soul on it." Silence. Then a younger voice filled with unmistakable awe. "Delta 2156, Sword 12. Did you say Viper is on board? Commander Rachel Kim?" Rachel reached for the microphone. Morrison handed it to her without hesitation. "Sword Flight, this is Viper. Confirm I'm on board Delta 2156, now safely on the ground at Malmstrom." The response came immediately, almost reverently. "Viper, Sword 11, Captain Jake Mitchell. Ma'am, my wingman and I request permission to perform a flyby to honor you. The entire fighter community needs to know you're safe." Rachel smiled for the first time since the emergency began. "Sword Flight, Viper. You're cleared for your flyby. Make it good." She pointed out the windscreen where two small dots were growing rapidly larger. Within seconds, two F-22 Raptors dove from 30,000 feet, their afterburners lighting the Montana sky like twin suns. The fighters leveled at exactly 500 feet above the runway, perfectly aligned with the stopped airliner. As they passed overhead with a thunderous roar that shook the entire aircraft, both Raptors simultaneously rolled inverted, the missing man salute reserved only for fallen aviators or the most honored living pilots. As they rolled upright and climbed vertically into the clouds, both pilots had their hands raised in salute, visible through their canopies even at 500 miles per hour. Every passenger was pressed against the windows, watching in awe. Morrison and Park stared with open mouths. "Commander Kim," Morrison said slowly, "those F-22 pilots just performed an unauthorized aerobatic maneuver over an active runway during an emergency landing. They could face serious disciplinary action. Why would they risk that?" Rachel's eyes followed the disappearing fighters, emotion flickering across her usually controlled face. "Captain, in the military aviation community, there are bonds and traditions that transcend regulations. Those pilots just told me and everyone watching that I'm one of them. That I'm respected. That what I did today mattered. They'll write reports and probably get reprimanded, but to them, it will be worth every minute of paperwork." As emergency crews began evacuating passengers via mobile stairs, word spread through Malmstrom at lightning speed. By the time Rachel exited the aircraft, the tarmac was filling with personnel. Colonel Henderson met her at the bottom of the stairs and immediately saluted with parade ground precision. Rachel, technically retired from active duty, hesitated only a moment before returning the salute with equal formality. "Commander Kim, Henderson said, dropping the salute and extending her hand. I'm Colonel Sarah Henderson, Base Commander. It's an honor to have you at Malmstrom, though I wish it were under better circumstances. I've read your service record. What you did today was extraordinary. Around them, Air Force personnel in flight suits were forming up. Rachel recognized the patches. Pilots from the 341st Missile Wing maintenance crews, operations personnel. As she watched, they came to attention in unison and raised their hands in salute. Rachel stood straighter and returned their salute, fighting to maintain her composure. Behind her, passengers were being helped down the stairs, many crying, some still in shock. Several stopped when they saw the military personnel saluting. Who is she? The businessman from 19B asked a paramedic. That's Commander Rachel Kim, the paramedic said quietly. Call sign Viper. One of the greatest naval aviators of our generation. She just saved all your lives. The businessman stared. That woman? She looked so ordinary. I sat next to her for 2 hours and never even looked at her. Over the next hour, as passengers were transported to the terminal for medical evaluation and rebooking, Rachel tried to blend into the background. But her attempt at invisibility failed completely. Captain Morrison and First Officer Park found her in a quiet corner of the operations center. Commander Kim, Morrison began, his voice thick with emotion. Kevin and I have been talking. We've been flying commercially for over 20 years combined. We thought we knew how to handle aircraft emergencies. Today you showed us we barely understood the surface of what's possible. Park continued, Ma'am, everything we train for in commercial aviation is based on working systems with known procedures. You taught us to think differently, to analyze fundamental aerodynamics, to improvise solutions, to use the aircraft in ways it wasn't designed for. You saved our lives and the lives of 185 passengers, but you also taught us something invaluable about what it truly means to be a pilot. Rachel felt unexpected emotion rising. Captain Morrison, First Officer Park, what I showed you wasn't magic. It's just training, very specific, very intensive training that military aviators receive for extreme situations. You both have the intelligence and skill to learn these techniques. Maybe this experience will help change how commercial pilots are trained. Morrison nodded emphatically. I'm going to advocate for exactly that. The FAA, pilot unions, aircraft manufacturers, they all need to hear about today. Commander, would you be willing to help develop training programs? If I can help make aviation safer, absolutely. As evening fell over Montana, Rachel boarded a Navy transport that had been dispatched to take her to Boston for her originally scheduled training exercises. She settled into a seat and looked out the window at Malmstrom growing smaller below. She thought about the day's events. About how a routine commercial flight had turned into a life-or-death emergency. About how her skills had been exactly what was needed at exactly the right moment. She thought about Captain Morrison and First Officer Park, two dedicated professionals who'd faced an impossible situation and trusted a complete stranger to guide them through it. She thought about the F-22 pilots who'd saluted from above, the Air Force personnel who'd stood at attention on the tarmac, Colonel Henderson's recognition. But mostly she thought about the businessman in 19B who'd never looked at her, the teenager in 19D who'd never seen her, the gate agent who'd scanned her ticket without seeing her face. She had been invisible in seat 19C that morning. Just another passenger in faded jeans and a hoodie, reading a paperback book. But when it mattered most, when 187 lives hung in the balance, she had been exactly who she needed to be. The transport climbed into the darkening Montana sky. Tomorrow would bring media attention, official Navy recognition, requests to tell her story dozens of times. But tonight, for a few hours, she could simply be Lieutenant Commander Rachel Kim, call sign Viper. A pilot who had done what pilots do, solved a problem, saved lives, and lived to fly another day. And somewhere over the dark Montana wilderness at 35,000 feet in a Navy transport, she allowed herself a small smile. She had been nobody in seat 19C that morning. But she had always been somebody. The world just hadn't been paying attention.